Have you ever wondered why your heart aches when you give too much, when your empathy spills over like a river with no banks leaving you? Hollow, a shadow of yourself. The world praises the empath, the one who feels the pain of others, as if it were their own. But what happens when that gift becomes a silent theft of your own soul? Carl Jung, the sage of the psyche, would call this the erasure of the self, a surrender to the collective unconscious, where the individual drowns in the weight of others' shadows. Empathy, that sacred bridge between souls, can become a labyrinth where you lose your own contours, your own myth. To understand this, one must descend into the depths of Jung's teachings, where archetypes dance and the ego battles to be seen, where the line between compassion and self-destruction is as thin as a whispered secret. In the realm of the psyche, empathy is both a gift and a peril. Jung spoke of the collective unconscious, that vast ocean of inherited wisdom and pain, where the archetypes, the mother, the hero, the shadow reside. The empath, often aligned with the mother archetype, cradles the wounds of others, absorbing their grief, their rage, their unspoken fears. Yet without boundaries, this act of holding becomes a form of projection, where the empath's ego dissolves into the other's story. You might find yourself nodding, listening to a friend's endless lament, your chest tightening as their pain becomes yours. You think you're helping, but are you? Or are you erasing your own edges, letting their shadow merge with yours until you no longer know where you end and they begin? Jung would argue, this is not empathy, but a failure of individuation, the process of becoming whole, distinct and true to your own myth. The danger lies in the unconscious. When you give without discernment, you risk becoming a vessel for others' unprocessed shadows. The shadow in Jungian terms is the hidden part of the psyche, the repository of all that is denied, suppressed, or feared. When you absorb another's pain without boundaries, you invite their shadow to dance with yours, creating a tangled waltz of projection and counter-projection. Picture yourself soothing a loved one, their anger seeping into your bones. You feel their rage, their betrayal, but instead of holding space, you take it on, letting it fester within you. This is not compassion. It is a surrender of your own psychic sovereignty. Jung warned that the unexamined life leads to projection, where we see our own darkness in others, or worse, take on their darkness as our own. Now pause and consider this. When was the last time you felt depleted after giving too much? That exhaustion, that quiet resentment is the psyche's cry for boundaries. Attachment theory. A modern lens on human connection echoes Jung's insights. Those with anxious or disorganized attachment often pour themselves into others, seeking validation through self-sacrifice. You might recognize this in yourself, the compulsion to fix, to heal, to save. But what are you saving them from? And at what cost to your own soul? The empath without boundaries is not a savior, but a martyr, offering their essence on an altar of others' needs. Jung would urge you to look within, to confront your own shadow, to ask why you feel compelled to erase yourself in the name of love. This is not to vilify empathy, but to illuminate its paradox. True empathy, Jung might say, is an act of individuation, a conscious choice to witness another's pain without losing your own center. It requires the courage to face your own shadow, to see where your need to give masks, a fear of being seen, of being enough. The collective unconscious hums with the stories of those who gave until they were empty, their myths unwritten, their voices silenced. You too carry this archetype within you, the wounded healer, the one who heals others at the cost of their own vitality. But healing, true healing, begins with the self. To love another without losing yourself, you must first know the contours of your own psyche, the places where your light and shadow meet. The path to this knowing is not easy. It demands shadow work, the brave act of facing the parts of yourself you've buried, the need for approval, the fear of abandonment, the guilt that whispers you must give more than you have. Jung believed that only by integrating these shadows could one achieve individuation, the sacred union of self. Without this, empathy becomes a trap, a slow dissolution of the ego into the collective. You might ask yourself, when I give, Am I truly seeing the other, or am I seeking to fill a void within? The answer lies in the silence of your own heart, where the archetypes whisper truths you've long ignored. The journey into the self is a descent into darkness, a pilgrimage through the labyrinth of the psyche where the archetypes weight their voices, both ancient and intimate. To give without boundaries is to betray the sacred task of individuation, to abandon the quest for wholeness in favor of a fragmented existence. The empath, caught in the undertow of others' emotions, often believes their sacrifice is noble, a testament to their depth of feeling. But Jung would see this as a refusal to confront the shadow, a refusal to claim the ego's rightful place as the mediator between the conscious and the unconscious. The empath's heart, open and unguarded, becomes a mirror, reflecting not only the pain of others, but also their own unacknowledged wounds. This is where the dance of projection becomes perilous, where the lines between self and other blur into a haze of unspoken longing. Consider the archetype of the martyr, that figure who offers themselves up for the salvation of others. In the collective unconscious, the martyr is both revered and pitied, a symbol of selflessness that masks a deeper refusal to live fully. You might see this in yourself, the quiet moments when you say yes to another's needs while your own heart whispers no. Why do you do this? What fear lurks beneath your generosity? Jung would point to the shadow, that repository of all you've denied. Perhaps the fear of being selfish, of being unloved, of standing alone in your truth. The martyr archetype thrives on this fear, feeding on the belief that your worth lies in how much you give. But this is a lie, a distortion born from the collective's demand for conformity over individuality. True empathy, Jung might argue, is not self-sacrifice, but self-possession, the ability to hold space for another while standing firmly in your own myth. Attachment theory offers a modern mirror to this ancient truth. Those who give without boundaries often carry an anxious attachment, a deep-seated fear that love must be earned through service. You might find yourself replaying this pattern, offering your energy, your time, your heart, hoping it will secure a bond that feels forever out of reach. But love, like the self, cannot be earned through erasure. Jung's concept of individuation demands that you confront this pattern, that you ask, who am I when I am not giving? What remains when I stop trying to save others? The answer lies in the work of shadow integration, in facing the parts of yourself you've buried beneath the need to be needed. This is not a rejection of empathy, but a reclamation of it, a shift from unconscious absorption to conscious connection. Imagine a moment when you felt drained, your spirit heavy with the weight of another's pain. Perhaps you listened to a friend's grief, their words cutting into you until you felt their sorrow as your own. In that moment, you were not merely empathizing, you were merging, losing the boundaries that define you as a separate soul. Jung would call this a failure of differentiation, a collapse of the ego into the collective unconscious. The ego, that fragile bridge between the conscious and the unconscious, must be strong enough to hold its ground. Without it, you become a vessel for the collective's pain, a repository for shadows not your own. This is why shadow work is essential. It forces you to face the parts of yourself that crave this merging, that find safety in losing yourself to another's story. Now turn inward and ask, what am I afraid to feel if I stop feeling for others? The answer might unsettle you, for it lives in the shadows. Perhaps the loneliness you've avoided, the anger you've suppressed, the grief you've never named. Jung believed that the shadow holds the key to individuation, that by embracing what we fear, we become whole. To set boundaries is not to close your heart, but to honor it, to recognize that your empathy is a gift, only when it flows from a place of strength. You are not meant to carry the world's pain, nor to erase yourself in the name of love. The collective unconscious may pull you toward sacrifice, but the path of individuation calls you back to yourself, to the unique myth only you can live. This journey requires courage, for it asks you to face the discomfort of saying no, of choosing yourself without guilt. It asks you to trust that your worth is not measured by how much you give, but by how fully you live. Jung's vision of the psyche is not one of endless giving, but of balance, of a dance between the self and the other, the conscious and the unconscious. To empathize without boundaries is to lose this dance to become a ghost in your own story. But to set boundaries is to step into your power to claim your place in the eternal myth of becoming. The archetypes whisper this truth: you are enough, not because you give, but because you are. The psyche is a tapestry woven from threads of light and shadow, a delicate balance between the self and the collective, the known and the hidden. To give without boundaries is to unravel this tapestry, to let the threads of your own story dissolve into the chaos of another's. Jung's vision of individuation is not a solitary act, but a relational one, a dance of connection that honors both the self and the other. Yet the empath caught in the pull of the collective unconscious often forgets this. They become the healer archetype, pouring their essence into wounds that are not theirs, believing that love demands the sacrifice of self. But love in its truest form is not a transaction. It is a meeting of two whole beings, each standing in their own truth. To lose yourself in empathy is to betray this truth, to let the ego dissolve into the shadows of others. Picture a moment when you felt invisible, your own needs buried beneath the weight of another's demands. Perhaps you stayed silent when you wanted to speak, or gave time you didn't have all to avoid the sting of guilt or rejection. This is the shadow at work, whispering that your worth lies in your utility, that to be loved is to be needed. Jung would urge you to pause here, to look into the mirror of your own psyche. What do you see? A figure exhausted by giving, or one radiant with self-possession? The path of individuation asks you to choose the latter, to reclaim the ego as the guardian of your inner world. Without boundaries, empathy becomes a form of projection, where you see your own unhealed wounds in the pain of others, and in trying to heal them, you neglect your own. Attachment theory illuminates this dynamic with stark clarity. Those who give without limits often carry wounds from early relationships, perhaps a parent whose love felt conditional, or a childhood spent proving your value through service. You might recognize this in the way you anticipate others' needs, always one step ahead, always ready to fix. But this is not empathy. It is survival, a pattern etched into the psyche by the fear of abandonment. Jung's concept of the shadow invites you to confront this fear, to ask, what would happen if I stopped? What if I trusted that I am enough, not for what I do, but for who I am? The answer lies in the work of integration, in bringing the shadow into the light, so that empathy becomes a choice, not a compulsion. The collective unconscious hums with the stories of those who gave until they were empty, their myths unwritten, their voices silenced. You carry these stories within you, archetypes that shape your choices: the caregiver, the sacrificer, the invisible one. But Jung reminds us that the psyche is not fixed. It is a living process, a journey toward wholeness. To set boundaries is to rewrite your myth, to step out of the collective script and into your own. This requires shadow work, the painful but liberating act of facing what you've avoided. Perhaps it's the anger you've buried, the resentment that festers when you give too much. Perhaps it's the grief of never being seen. These are the shadows that drive your unboundaried empathy, and only by naming them can you free yourself. Now imagine a different way of being. You listen to a friend's pain, but instead of taking it into your body, you hold space, your heart open but your boundaries firm. You feel their sorrow, but you do not become it. This is the empathy Jung would champion, an empathy rooted in individuation, where you honor both your own soul and theirs. It is not cold or distant. It is alive with presence, with the courage to say, I see you, but I am not you. This is the dance of true connection, where the ego stands as both witness and guardian, allowing love to flow without erasing the self. To reach this place, you must confront the discomfort of boundaries. Saying no feels like a betrayal, a rejection of the collective's demand for selflessness. But Jung would argue that boundaries are an act of love for yourself and for others. They create a space where authentic connection can flourish, where you can meet another without losing yourself. The archetypes of the collective unconscious may pull you toward sacrifice, but the path of individuation calls you to stand firm, to claim your right to exist as a whole, distinct being. You are not here to dissolve into the pain of others, but to shine as a light in your own right, a beacon of compassion that begins with self-compassion. The journey is not without its challenges. The shadow will resist, whispering that boundaries are selfish, that love requires sacrifice. But listen closely, the psyche knows better. It knows that true empathy is a gift, not a burden, and that to give from a place of wholeness is to honor the sacred dance of human connection. You are enough, not because you save others, but because you dare to save yourself. The heart of the empath beats with a rhythm both ancient and urgent, a pulse that echoes the collective unconscious, yet yearns for the singular song of the self. To give without boundaries is to surrender to the archetype of the sacrificer, to let the ego dissolve into the vast, formless sea of others' needs. Jung's teachings remind us that the psyche is not a passive vessel, but a dynamic force, a crucible where light and shadow forge the self into wholeness. Yet the empath, caught in the undertow of collective pain, often forgets this. They become the wounded healer, their compassion, a double-edged sword that cuts both ways, offering solace to others while carving away at their own essence. To break this cycle is to embrace individuation, to claim the ego as a sacred boundary between the self and the world. Imagine a moment when you felt the weight of another's sorrow, their words pulling you into a vortex of shared pain. Perhaps you stayed listening, absorbing until your own heart felt heavy with their grief. This is the empath's paradox. The desire to connect becomes a loss of self, emerging with the collective unconscious where individual boundaries blur. Jung would call this a failure of differentiation, a refusal to honor the ego's role as the guardian of your inner myth. The ego, fragile yet essential, is not the enemy of empathy, but its protector, ensuring that your compassion flows from a place of strength rather than depletion. Without it, you risk becoming a mirror for others' shadows, reflecting their pain while neglecting your own. Attachment theory offers a lens to understand this dynamic. Those who give without limits often carry an anxious need for connection, a belief that love is earned through sacrifice. You might see this in yourself, the way you anticipate others' needs, the way you silence your own desires to keep the peace. But this is not love. It is a transaction, a bargain struck in the shadows of your psyche. Jung's concept of the shadow invites you to face this bargain, to ask, what am I seeking when I give too much? Is it love, or is it the avoidance of my own pain? The answer lies in the work of shadow integration, in naming the fears that drive your unboundaried empathy. The fear of being alone, of being unworthy of standing in your own truth. The collective unconscious is a repository of archetype stories that shape the human experience. Among them is the caregiver, the one who nurtures at the cost of their own vitality. You carry this archetype within you, its voice whispering that to be good is to give, that to be loved is to serve. But Jung would argue that true goodness lies in wholeness, in the courage to set boundaries that honor both self and other. To do this, you must confront the shadow, the parts of yourself you've buried beneath the need to be needed. Perhaps it's the anger you've suppressed, the resentment that simmers when you give beyond your capacity. Perhaps it's the grief of never being seen. These are the shadows that fuel your self-erasure, and only by embracing them can you reclaim your myth. Now picture a different way of being. You sit with a loved one, their pain unfolding before you. You listen, you feel, but you do not take their sorrow into your body. Your boundaries are a sacred circle, a space where you can witness their truth without losing your own. This is the empathy of individuation, a conscious act of connection that honors the self as much as the other. It is not detachment, but presence, a willingness to see without merging, to love without dissolving. Jung would see this as the work of the hero archetype, the one who ventures into the darkness of the psyche and returns with the gift of wholeness. You are that hero called to face your own shadows so that your empathy becomes a light, not a burden. This path is not without its trials. The collective unconscious will tempt you with the allure of sacrifice, with the promise that giving more will make you enough. But listen to the deeper voice within the one that knows your worth is not measured by how much you give, but by how fully you live. To set boundaries is to rewrite the script of your life, to step out of the archetype of the sacrificer and into the archetype of the self, the integrated whole being who loves from a place of strength. You might ask yourself, what would it feel like to give without losing myself? The answer lies in the silence of your own heart, where the archetypes whisper of a love that does not demand erasure, but celebrates existence. The journey of individuation is a call to balance, to dance between the self and the other, without losing your footing. It is a call to honor the ego, not as a barrier, but as a bridge, a way to connect without dissolving. You are not here to carry the world's pain, but to witness it, to offer compassion from a place of wholeness. The psyche knows this truth, and it waits for you to claim it. The psyche is a crucible where the raw material of the self is forged, a place where the archetypes of the collective unconscious whisper both warnings and invitations. To give without boundaries is to surrender to the archetype of the victim, to let the ego dissolve into the chaos of others' unclaimed pain. Jung's vision of individuation is not a retreat from the world, but a radical engagement with it, a commitment to stand in your own truth while meeting others in theirs. Yet the empath, swept up in the currents of collective suffering, often loses this balance. They become the redeemer, seeking to save others at the cost of their own vitality, their compassion, a silent plea for their own redemption. To break this cycle is to embrace the shadow, to face the hidden fears that drive this self-erasure, and reclaim the self as a sacred center. Picture yourself in a moment of quiet exhaustion, your heart heavy with the weight of another's story. Perhaps you've listened to a colleague's frustrations, their words weaving a web around you until you feel their anger as your own. This is the empath's trap, the belief that to feel with another is to become them, to let their pain eclipse your own light. Jung would call this a surrender to the collective unconscious, a failure to differentiate the ego from the archetypes that pull at it. The ego, though often maligned, is the anchor of individuation, the force that holds your myth intact amidst the chaos of the world. Without it, empathy becomes a form of possession where you take on the shadows of others, mistaking their pain for your purpose. Attachment theory sheds light on this dynamic, revealing how early wounds shape the empath's need to give. Those with anxious or avoidant attachment often seek safety and selflessness, believing that love is a ledger to be balanced through sacrifice. You might see this in yourself, the way you rush to meet others' needs, the way you silence your own desires to avoid conflict. But this is not connection. It is a performance, a mask worn to hide the fear of being unloved. Jung's concept of the shadow invites you to peel back this mask, to ask, what am I avoiding when I give too much? Is it the loneliness I fear, or the power of my own voice? The answer lies in the work of shadow integration, in facing the parts of yourself that crave approval at the cost of your own truth. The collective unconscious is a vast tapestry of archetypes, each one a story that shapes the human soul. Among them is the Redeemer, the one who seeks to heal the world's wounds while ignoring their own. You carry this archetype within you, its voice whispering that your worth lies in how much you save others. But Jung would argue that true salvation begins within, in the courage to set boundaries that honor your own existence. To do this, you must confront the shadow, the resentment that festers when you overgive, the guilt that whispers you're not enough unless you're needed. These are the shadows that drive your unboundaried empathy, and only by naming them can you step into the archetype of the self, the integrated being who loves without losing. Now imagine a moment of true connection. You sit with a friend, their pain unfolding like a storm. You listen, you feel, but you do not drown in their tempest. Your boundaries are a sacred vessel holding space for their truth while preserving your own. This is the empathy of individuation, a conscious act of presence that honors both self and other. It is not a rejection of feeling, but a refinement of it, a choice to witness without merging, to love without erasing. Jung would see this as the work of the wise one, the archetype who navigates the psyche's depths with clarity and compassion. You are that wise one called to face your own shadows, so that your empathy becomes a gift, not a sacrifice. This path demands courage, for the collective unconscious will tempt you with the myth of the selfless hero, the one who gives until they are empty. But listen to the deeper truth within: the one that knows your worth is not in your sacrifice, but in your presence. To set boundaries is to rewrite your story, to step out of the archetype of the victim and into the archetype of the creator, the one who shapes their own myth with intention and love. You might ask yourself, what would it feel like to love without fear? The answer lies in the silence of your own psyche, where the archetypes whisper of a compassion that does not demand your erasure, but celebrates your existence. The journey of individuation is a dance of balance, a movement between the self and the other that requires both strength and grace. It is a call to honor the ego as a bridge, not a barrier, a way to connect without dissolving. You are not here to absorb the world's pain, but to reflect its light, to offer compassion from a place of wholeness. The psyche knows this truth, and it waits for you to live it. The psyche is a sacred arena where the self is both forged and found, a place where the archetypes of the collective unconscious weave stories of longing, sacrifice, and redemption. To give without boundaries is to surrender to the archetype of the lost one, to let the ego dissolve into the vast uncharted waters of others' pain. Jung's vision of individuation is a call to return to the self, not as a retreat from connection, but as a deepening of it, a commitment to meet others in their truth while standing firmly in your own. The empath, caught in the tide of collective suffering, often forgets this, becoming the savior who seeks to heal the world while their own wounds bleed unseen. To break this cycle is to embrace the shadow, to face the hidden fears that drive this self-erasure, and reclaim the self as a radiant center. Imagine a moment when you felt your own light dim, your energy drained by the act of carrying another's burden. Perhaps you've sat with a loved one, their grief or anger spilling over, and you've taken it into your heart, believing it was your duty to bear it. This is the empath's illusion, that love demands the dissolution of self, that to feel deeply is to lose your own edges. Jung would call this a surrender to the collective unconscious, a failure to honor the ego's role as the keeper of your unique myth. The ego, though often misunderstood, is the compass of individuation, guiding you through the chaos of collective pain. Without it, empathy becomes a form of possession, where you absorb the shadows of others, mistaking their darkness for your own. Attachment theory reveals the roots of this pattern, showing how early experiences shape the empath's need to give. Those with anxious or disorganized attachment often seek love through selflessness, believing that their worth lies in how much they can endure for others. You might recognize this in yourself, the way you prioritize others' needs, the way you silence your own voice to avoid rejection. But this is not compassion. It is a survival mechanism, a way to avoid the pain of being unseen. Jung's concept of the shadow invites you to confront this pain, to ask, what am I hiding from when I give too much? Is it the fear of being unworthy, or the power of my own presence? The answer lies in the work of shadow integration, in facing the parts of yourself that seek love through sacrifice. The collective unconscious is a vast repository of archetypes, each one a story that shapes the human journey. Among them is the savior, the one who carries the world's pain in the hope of redemption. You carry this archetype within you, its voice whispering that your value lies in how much you save others. But Jung would argue that true redemption begins within, in the courage to set boundaries that honor your own existence. To do this, you must face the shadow, the guilt that whispers you're selfish for saying no, the loneliness that surfaces when you stop giving. These are the shadows that fuel your unboundaried empathy, and only by embracing them can you step into the archetype of the self, the integrated being who loves from a place of wholeness. Now picture a moment of true presence. You sit with someone, their pain unfolding before you like a fragile tapestry. You listen, you feel, but you do not take their sorrow into your soul. Your boundaries are a sacred space, a vessel that holds their truth while preserving your own. This is the empathy of individuation, a conscious act of connection that honors both self and other. It is not a rejection of feeling, but a celebration of it, a choice to witness without merging, to love without dissolving. Jung would see this as the work of the alchemist, the archetype who transforms pain into wisdom, shadow into light. You are that alchemist called to face your own shadows so that your empathy becomes a gift, not a loss. This path requires courage, for the collective unconscious will tempt you with the myth of the selfless martyr, the one who gives until they are nothing. But listen to the deeper truth within. The one that knows your worth is not in your sacrifice, but in your being. To set boundaries is to rewrite your myth, to step out of the archetype of the lost one and into the archetype of the creator, the one who shapes their own story with intention and grace. You might ask yourself, what would it feel like to love without losing myself? The answer lies in the silence of your own heart, where the archetypes whisper of a compassion that does not demand your erasure, but celebrates your light. The journey of individuation is a call to integration, to weave the threads of self and other into a tapestry of balance. It is a call to honor the ego as a sacred bridge, a way to connect without dissolving. You are not here to absorb the world's pain, but to reflect its beauty, to offer compassion from a place of wholeness. The individual who truly understands their depths extends that grace to the world.